Section 15 of the Expedition of Humphry Clinker. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Martin Geeson. The Expedition of Humphry Clinker by Tobias Smollett. Section 15. To Sir WATKIN PHILLIPS, of Jesus College, Oxford. Bath, April 24th. Dear Phillips, you have indeed reason to be surprised that I should have concealed my correspondence with Miss Blackerby from you, to whom I disclosed all my other connections of that nature. But the truth is, I never dreamed of any such commerce, till your last informed me that it had produced something which could not be much longer concealed. It is a lucky circumstance, however, that her reputation will not suffer any detriment, but rather derive advantage from the discovery, which will prove at least that it is not quite so rotten as most people imagined. For my own part, I declare to you, in all the sincerity of friendship, that far from having any amorous intercourse with the object in question, I never had the least acquaintance with her person. But if she is really in the condition you describe, I suspect Mansell to be at the bottom of the whole. His visits to that shrine were no secret, and this attachment, added to some good offices which you know he has done me since I left Alma Mater, give me a right to believe him capable of saddling me with this scandal when my back was turned. Nevertheless, if my name can be of any service to him, he is welcome to make use of it. And if the woman should be abandoned enough to swear his bantling to me, I must beg the favour of you to compound with the parish. I shall pay the penalty without repining, and you will be so good as to draw upon me immediately for the sum required. On this occasion I act by the advice of my uncle, who says I shall have good luck if I pass through life without being obliged to make many more compositions of the same kind. The old gentleman told me last night, with great good humour, that betwixt the age of 20 and 40 he had been obliged to provide for 9 bastards, sworn to him by women whom he never saw. Mr. Bramble's character, which seems to interest you greatly, opens and improves upon me every day. His singularities afford a rich mine of entertainment. His understanding, so far as I can judge, is well cultivated. His observations on life are equally just, pertinent, and uncommon. He affects misanthropy in order to conceal the sensibility of a heart which is tender, even to a degree of weakness. This delicacy of feeling, or soreness of the mind, makes him timorous and fearful, but then he is afraid of nothing so much as of dishonour. And although he is exceedingly cautious of giving offence, he will fire at the least hint of insolence or ill-breeding. Respectable as he is upon the whole, I can't help being sometimes diverted by his little distresses, which provoke him to let fly the shafts of his satire, keen and penetrating as the arrows of Teucer. Our aunt Tabitha acts upon him as a perpetual grindstone. She is in all respects a striking contrast to her brother. But I reserve her portrait for another occasion. 3 days ago we came hither from the Hot Well, and took possession of the first floor of a lodging-house on the South Parade, a situation which my uncle chose for its being near the Bath, and remote from the noise of carriages. He was scarce warm in the lodgings when he called for his nightcap, his wide shoes and flannel, and declared himself invested with the gout in his right foot. though I believe it had as yet reached no farther than his imagination. It was not long before he had reason to repent his premature declaration, for our Aunt Tabitha found means to make such a clamour and confusion before the flannels could be produced from the trunk, that one would have imagined the house was on fire. All this time uncle sat boiling with impatience, biting his fingers, throwing up his eyes, and muttering ejaculations. At length he burst into a kind of convulsive laugh, after which he hummed a song, and when the hurricane was over, exclaimed, "Blessed be God for all things!" This, however, was but the beginning of his troubles. Mistress Tabitha's favourite dog, Chowder, having paid his compliments to a female turnspit of his own species in the kitchen, involved himself in a quarrel with no fewer than 5 rivals, who set upon him at once, and drove him upstairs to the dining-room door with hideous noise. There our aunt and her woman, taking arms in his defence, joined the concert, which became truly diabolical. This fray being with difficulty suppressed by the intervention of our own footman and the cook-maid of the house, the squire had just opened his mouth to expostulate with Tabby, when the town waits in the passage below struck up their music, if music it may be called, with such a sudden burst of sound as made him start and stare, with marks of indignation and disquiet. He had recollection enough to send his servant with some money to silence those noisy intruders, and they were immediately dismissed, though not without some opposition on the part of Tabitha, who thought it but reasonable that he should have more music for his money. Scarce had he settled this knotty point, when a strange kind of thumping and bouncing was heard right overhead in the 2nd story, so loud and violent as to shake the whole building. I own I was exceedingly provoked at this new alarm, and before my uncle had time to express himself on the subject, I ran upstairs to see what was the matter. Finding the room door open, I entered without ceremony, and perceived an object which I cannot now recollect without laughing to excess. It was a dancing master, with his scholar, in the act of teaching. The master was blind of one eye, and lame of one foot, and led about the room his pupil, who seemed to be about the age of 80, stooped mortally, was tall, raw-boned, hard-favoured, with a woollen nightcap on his head, and he had stripped off his coat that he might be more nimble in his motions. Finding himself intruded upon by a person he did not know, he forthwith girded himself with a long iron sword, and advancing to me with a peremptory air, pronounced in a true Hibernian accent, "Mr. Watkin, by my soul and conscience, I am very glad to see you, if you are after coming in the way of friendship, and indeed now, I believe you are my friend sure enough, though I never had the honour to see your face before, my dear, for because you come like a friend, without any ceremony at all. I told him the nature of my visit would not admit of ceremony, that I was come to desire he would make less noise, as there was a sick gentleman below, whom he had no right to disturb with such preposterous doings. "Why, look ye now, young gentleman," replied this original, "perhaps upon another occasion I might civilly request you to explain the meaning of that hard word, preposterous. But there's a time for all things, honey." So saying, he passed me with great agility, and running downstairs, found our footman at the dining-room door, of whom he demanded admittance to pay his respect to the stranger. As the fellow did not think proper to refuse the request of such a formidable figure, he was immediately introduced, and addressed himself to my uncle in these words: "Your humble servant, good sir. I'm not so preposterous, as your son calls it, but I know the rules of civility. I'm a poor knight of Ireland. My name is Sir Ulick Macillicut, of the county of Galway. Being your fellow lodger, I'm come to pay my respects, and to welcome you to the South Parade, and to offer my best services to you, your good lady, and your pretty daughter, and even to the young gentleman your son, though he thinks me a preposterous fellow. You must know I am to have the honour to open a ball next door to-morrow with Lady Macmanus, and being rusted in my dancing, I was refreshing my memory with a little exercise. But if I had known there was a sick person below, by Christ, I would have sooner danced a hornpipe upon my own head than walk the softest minuet over yours." My uncle, who was not a little startled at his first appearance, received his compliment with great complacency, insisted upon his being seated, thanked him for the honour of his visit, and reprimanded me for my abrupt expostulation with a gentleman of his rank and character. Thus tutored, I asked pardon of the knight, who, forthwith starting up, embraced me so close that I could hardly breathe, and assured me he loved me as his own soul. At length, recollecting his nightcap, he pulled it off in some confusion, and with his bald pate uncovered, made 1,000 apologies to the ladies as he retired. At that instant the abbey bells began to ring so loud that we could not hear one another speak, and this peal, as we afterwards learned, was for the honour of Mr. Bullock, an eminent cow-keeper of Tottenham, who had just arrived at Bath to drink the waters for indigestion. Mr. Bramble had not time to make his remarks upon the agreeable nature of this serenade before his ears were saluted with another concert that interested him more nearly. 2 negroes belonging to a Creole gentleman, who lodged in the same house, taking their station at a window in the staircase, about 10 feet from our dining-room door, began to practise upon the French horn, and being in the very first rudiments of execution, produced such discordant sounds as might have discomposed the organs of an ass. You may guess what effect they had upon the irritable nerves of uncle, who, with the most admirable expression of splenetic surprise in his countenance, sent his man to silence these dreadful blasts, and desire the musicians to practise in some other place, as they had no right to stand there and disturb all the lodgers in the house. Those sable performers, far from taking the hint and withdrawing, treated the messenger with great insolence, bidding him carry his compliments to their master, Colonel Rigworm, who would give him a proper answer, and a good drubbing into the bargain. In the meantime they continued their noise, and even endeavoured to make it more disagreeable, laughing between whiles at the thoughts of being able to torment their betters with impunity. Our squire, incensed at the additional insult, immediately dispatched the servant with his compliments to Colonel Rigworm, requesting that he would order his blacks to be quiet, as the noise they made was altogether intolerable. To this message the Creole colonel replied, that his horns had a right to sound on a common staircase, that there they should play for his diversion, and that those who did not like the noise might look for lodgings elsewhere. Mr Bramble no sooner received this reply than his eyes began to glisten, his face grew pale, and his teeth chattered. After a moment's pause he slipped on his shoes, without speaking a word, or seeming to feel any further disturbance from the gout in his toes. Then, snatching his cane, he opened the door and proceeded to the place where the black trumpeters were posted. There, without further hesitation, he began to belabour them both, and exerted himself with such astonishing vigour and agility that both their heads and horns were broken in a twinkling, and they ran howling downstairs to their master's parlour door. The squire, following them half-way, called aloud, that their colonel might hear him, "Go, rascals, and tell your master what I have done. If he thinks himself injured, he knows where to come for satisfaction. As for you, this is but an earnest of what you shall receive, if ever you presume to blow a horn again here, while I stay in the house." So saying, he retired to his apartment, in expectation of hearing from the West Indian, but the colonel prudently declined any farther prosecution of the dispute. My sister Liddy was frighted into a fit, from which she was no sooner recovered than Mistress Tabitha began a lecture upon patience, which her brother interrupted with a most significant grin. "True, sister, God increase my patience and your discretion. I wonder," added he, "what sort of sonata we are to expect from this overture, in which the devil that presides over horrid sounds hath given us such variations of discord. The trampling of porters, the creaking and crashing of trunks, the snarling of curs, the scolding of women, the squeaking and squalling of fiddles and hautboys out of tune, the bouncing of the Irish baronet overhead, and the bursting, belching, and brattling of the French horns in the passage, not to mention the harmonious peal that still thunders from the abbey steeple, succeeding one another without interruption, like the different parts of the same concert, have given me such an idea of what a poor invalid has to expect in this temple dedicated to silence and repose, that I shall certainly shift my quarters tomorrow, and endeavour to effectuate my retreat before Sir Ulic opens the ball with my Lady Macmanus, a conjunction that bodes me no good." This intimation was by no means agreeable to Mistress Tabitha, whose ears were not quite so delicate as those of her brother. She said it would be great folly to move from such agreeable lodgings the moment they were comfortably settled. She wondered he should be such an enemy to music and mirth. She heard no noise but of his own making. It was impossible to manage a family in dumb show. He might harp as long as he pleased upon her scolding, but she never scolded except for his advantage. But he would never be satisfied, even though she should sweat blood and water in his service. I have a great notion that our aunt, who is now declining into the most desperate state of celibacy, had formed some design upon the heart of Sir Ulic Mackilligut, which she feared might be frustrated by our abrupt departure from these lodgings. Her brother, eyeing her askance, "Pardon me, sister," said he, "I should be a savage indeed, were I insensible of my own felicity in having such a mild, complacent, good-humoured, and considerate companion and housekeeper. But as I have got a weak head, and my sense of hearing is painfully acute, before I have recourse to plugs of wool and cotton, I'll try whether I can't find another lodging where I shall have more quiet and less music." He accordingly dispatched his man upon this service, and next day he found a small house in Milsham Street, which he hires by the week. Here at least we enjoy convenience and quiet within doors, as much as Tabby's temper will allow; but the squire still complains of flying pains in the stomach and head, for which he bathes and drinks the waters. He is not so bad, however, but that he goes in person to the pump, the rooms, and the coffee houses, where he picks up continual food for ridicule and satire. If I can glean anything for your amusement, either from his observation or my own, you shall have it freely, though I am afraid it will poorly compensate the trouble of reading these tedious, insipid letters of, dear Phillips, yours always, J. MELFORD. Section 15.